We'd like to welcome you back. Welcome everybody. Welcome back to our live stream with Georgina Mumba. Like we said, Georgina is a disability advocate, and she has been a champion for those people living with disabilities and trying to bring to the fore and trying to bring a mindset shift concerning the way we look at people living with disabilities. We'd like to welcome Georgina back, and we thank God that she can hear us now. So Georgina, welcome back. Thank you for joining us again on Scars to Scars.
Thank you, Pastor.
I'm so excited because now you can hear, and the whole of Zambia, everybody watching on CBC television and on Facebook and YouTube, we all are live listening to you. We want to say thank you, first of all, for the courageous life you have lived, championing the cause, not just walking and overcoming disability, but championing the cause of people living with disability and helping us to see them not as people living with disability, but people with other abilities. I think that is a very, very good way of looking at people, because oftentimes our mentality, as you have told us, hinders the way we relate, and we help them grow their potential. Every one of us has potential. I really enjoyed your TED Talk. I thought it was brilliant. I thought the mind you carry is a mind we should share. We shouldn't just have TED Talk, we should have Georgina Talk. I want to hear you bring more from that beautiful mind. So tell us about Georgina this evening. Who is Georgina? And tell us where the disabilities come from and what's your story. Let's talk about it. Please go ahead.
So as Pastor has already alluded to, my name is Georgina Mumba. I was born and raised right here in Zambia. I did part of my primary education on the Copper Belt. After the Copper Belt, I came to Lusaka, where I did my undergrad education. I have a bachelor's degree in economics and development studies. I also have a master's degree in policy analysis and public administration. Like he has also said, I'm a polio survivor. I contracted polio at the tender age of 2. And from henceforward, I've been a paraplegic. And by consequence of that life-changing experience, I found myself as a disability inclusion advocate. For me, disability inclusion advocacy is really not about work. It's more of a lifestyle, because everywhere I am, everywhere I interact with people, I interact with the environment, I see opportunities where we can do better to alleviate the sufferings that persons with disabilities go through. So that is my background on how I got into the whole disability inclusion advocacy. Professionally, of course, I'm a policy analyst. I work with the Zambian government. I've been in the public service for over 10 years now, but I find my personal life, which is in advocacy, as well as in my policy work, there is a cohesion there. There's a relationship there, because what we do as government is for the people. And it is by how I interact with my challenges that I help the government inform the policies that they come up with, especially when it comes to including issues of disability inclusion. Right now, we're talking of elections. I'm sure people have heard of conversations about how to be inclusive in the electoral process for persons with disabilities. So that is how I would say my work in disability inclusion advocacy interacts with my professional work. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. What we would like to go on to see, if you can, please guide us into the life. You contracted polio at 2 and you survived polio at 2. You were still very young. So at that time, apart from the affliction and the pain, you haven't known much. Those are your dogs.
Yes. Just a moment. Sorry.
No problem. They're there to guard and protect. So they are doing their jobs, and they're excited. You're on television talking about them. You're even talking about them right now. Tell us about the life of a child growing with polio. How did you go to school? How did your parents cope? It's one thing, most times they look at women as if they are people with disability already. Then you're a woman and you have a physical disability again, which is like a double disability in the society we have lived in. What was it like for your parents? What was it like going to school? Did you go to school? And how did you become this wonderful policy analyst? And I hope you will really get to where policies are made in Parliament, because that's where I think we need you the most. So tell us, how was it growing up? 2 years old, what was it like?
My memories of my childhood, unfortunately, is not like what I would hear of my friends when they talk about their childhood. It was a very lonely period of my life, because as a disabled person, you don't get to interact with people a lot. There are many layers that contribute to that loneliness. One is the stigma that comes with being disabled, not to you as the disabled person only, but also to the family itself. I cannot speak for my parents, I cannot speak for my family, but I do know that they have also suffered in the process. As a consequence of me being disabled, they've also been victims of that stigma being related to someone who's disabled. As far as going to school goes, I'm very grateful to my parents that from a very tender age, as young as preschool, I was already taken to school. Unfortunately, being late to start education is something that is of a norm in the narrative of someone with a disability. It takes time before we get inducted into schools because of the challenge of schools themselves being inaccessible, or the schools being too far away, or the family being unsure whether they have to invest in this disabled child or not. For my part, I credit that open-mindedness to my father, who's late, and my mother. I remember my mother used to carry me on her back to take me to school, and then she would alternate with my older sisters and sometimes even friends from school. The older kids would also help in carrying me to and from school. At the time, I didn't even have a wheelchair, which are some of also the other challenges that we could delve into. The issue of assistive devices for children with disabilities, persons with disabilities, and how all that lack of resources contributes to the challenges that persons with disabilities face in accessing education and accessing just about any other services that is relevant to the health and the growth and just general thriving of a person. From there, I also have memories of a lot of time that was spent in hospitals for rehabilitative purposes. I have a number of surgeries. I believe at the time that were an attempt to help salvage whatever ability that I could salvage, but unfortunately not much changed. I ended up being paraplegic, like I said. Before, I used to use crutches and calipers, but over time, I had lost the ability to depend on crutches and calipers, and that's how I transcended to fully using a wheelchair. So, yes, but also part of that education, I spent it in. I've been to ordinary schools as well as special schools, but the greater time of my primary and upper education, I would say, was spent in a special school on the Copper Belt. I've also learned in Southern Province, in Choma, at another special school, but the greater part was spent in Luansha at Dagama School. Then from there, I graduated to the University of Zambia, and then I got into employment. So my experience of disability as as a young girl, looking back, is that it robbed me of a childhood. It robbed me of things that people take for granted, such as childhood memories of friendships and adventures and everything. For me, that was never part of my growing up. My best friend has always been my books and television. When people tell me your dictum is quite good, I always say I'll credit it to the books, and that is because not only because I was quite keen on reading or anything like that, but that's the only way I accessed the world is through books. That those were my doors and windows into the world. And so, like I said, it's not a childhood that you look back to with a lot of fond memories, but there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of loss, and there's a lot of pain for everyone involved, not only for myself, but also for my family. But like I said, wherever I am today, whatever I am today, I credit it to my family. And that's why I would always say the one key factor to a thriving person with disability is a great support system. And this is not only at the family level, this is at many levels. As I mentioned earlier on, I said that even friends from school could help me sometimes to get me home. And this was ignited by the teachers who saw potential in me. And so, excuse me, in their own way, they thought, how could they help my family to alleviate that stress of bringing me to school and taking me back? I do know that probably may have been wrong in its own way, because nobody has the right to tell another child to help another child. But these are the burdens that we are putting on other people out there in their own way of making the community thrive. I'm very grateful to people that took that responsibility onto themselves to help me out and to be where I am today. And this is why I do what I do, because I know that I'm here not because of my own accord. It's not just me. It's been a lot of people. Like we say in Africa, that it takes a village to raise a child. And I do know that it's taken more than a village to get me to where I am. So I hope that in my own way, I can also be part of that village and help others thrive.
Absolutely. And we thank them. We thank your parents, your father, your mother. We thank your sisters and your friends, because you said your mother used to take you on her back to school until you became too heavy for her to carry. And
Right.
what you are saying for us is not just because you are fortunate, as in you have, you've had a family that has been supportive. You've advocated that people with disabilities should have a very supportive environment. And in being supportive, you have been privileged to have. But there are millions of people that haven't, thousands of people that haven't had that. And therefore, your advocacy is not just to say that we should be supportive, it's for the whole society, not just the family now, but the entire society to have that mentality, that supportive mentality, to come together and collectively help see the full potential of every child and of every Zambian. I'd like you to take us into, you want to say something, please? This is you. We're here for you. Please talk to me if you want to say something. Just tell me, hey, hush. And
no, I was just agreeing with you on the whole concept of family being supportive, and that goes that is also reflective of the community in which that family is, because as I mentioned, to say that being disabled victimizes the family as well and exposes them to stigma that the wider community, people would always ask to say, why do you have a disabled child? And normally it's the woman that would bear the burden or the brunt of that stigma, to say probably you did something, that's why you ended up with a disabled child. So I believe that my mother and my father and my whole family were able to do what they were able to do for me, because the community in a way allowed them to do that. Otherwise, like you have rightly said, again, there's so many of my friends that I've interacted with. There's so many of my friends that I do know, even to this day, that do not have the support of their families, and they are struggling because of that. So for me, I'll always emphasize on the need for having a support system, a great support system, starting from the family, starting from the neighborhoods, and everyone that is involved in the life of this child.
What would you say concerning, you mentioned something about your mom, and that is so true concerning lots of women. In society, the way our society is constructed, when there's a problem with the child, they always blame the woman. And the woman oftentimes will go back into her own life and think maybe it's something she did wrong and she's been punished, or this is what, I know probably your mom may not have shared, but what do you think? Was that an experience that you probably saw from your mom, or did people project that to her? How was it for her?
Unfortunately, like you have said, these are very difficult conversations to have. It's a difficult conversation for me to go back in time and try to establish what happened and how did that impact my mother. But I do know that, like I mentioned, that there was a lot of hospitals involved. There was a lot of segregation, sometimes for lack of a better term, isolation, in the sense that in as much as we may not have talked about these things, but I do know that she had been isolated because of my situation, and chances are that many people had blamed her for me being the way I am, and had questioned what could have happened, because from both my father's and my mother's family, I'm the only disabled person that I know of. So you can imagine the questions that came with me being the only disabled person. So in as much as the direct confrontations that may have come out of my being disabled directed to my mother, I wouldn't want to pretend I do know exactly how or what was said, but I do know that it had been a very lonely journey, because I don't remember any of her family members helping out with me, or anyone sitting by my bedside while she was there with me for months and months, helping her maybe to just go home and also rest. I don't remember any of that. And to me, that says more than anything that could have been audibly said. So, wow. Yes.
These are the scars that women go through that oftentimes we take for granted. We have demoralized the pain that women go through. And we thank you for being bold and courageous enough to share, even in this vulnerability. It's not something that is comfortable to talk about. Let's talk about something else that, like I said, I really enjoy listening to your TED Talk. I love TED Talks.
Thank you.
And
right.
Oftentimes I try to listen to a TED Talk a day. I've not been consistent recently, but I just love TED Talks. And right. It was such a joy to see you as one of the speakers on a TED Talk. And one thing you talked about was your experience going through school, starting from the first school you went and the way they treated you, the way you were, again, to no fault of anybody. Maybe at that time we didn't know how to handle polio cases, we didn't understand, and how somebody saw you scribbling, you were sitting on the bare floor and scribbling, and they took you to another class, totally misunderstood. And again, could you take us through that? What does a person with polio go through? What does a person with disability go through? Can you help us walk your journey? Take us on this journey, because most of us don't know.
Right. So as I mentioned, that I have been through regular schools and then special schools, and even when it comes to special schools, there are different types of special schools. But to a lay person, when you mention a special school, you'd think it's an umbrella term for all kinds of schools. So what really happened was, like I mentioned, that over time I outgrew the possibility of my parents and my family and friends to carry me on their back and everything. So at some point, I had to go into a boarding school. So when we looked around for a boarding school, somebody proposed that there was a school in Southern Province where I could go. But unfortunately, they had not done their research to understand what type of a school it was. Like I said, a special school to people is a special school. So all kinds of disabled people could go there. So when I got there, that's when it dawned on me that actually that was not a suitable school for me. Unfortunately, it began as an orphanage, and then over time it graduated into some basic school of sorts. It wasn't really academic per se. There was not much focus on the academics, so they were just providing bare minimum education services just to keep the kids busy and everything. So this is how I found myself in a class for kids with a limited, or should I say, intellectual disabilities, because I couldn't fit in any other class. There was a class for the visually impaired, there was a class for the speech impaired, and then there was a class for those with intellectual disabilities. Unfortunately, or I don't know whether it's unfortunate or fortunate, for me, the only disability I had was that I was paraplegic. I could not walk. So I couldn't fit in any of the schools. So they just threw me in that class and said, well, at least they can all talk and they can all hear. And besides, there's no proper education going on, so she can fit in there. And that's how I ended up in that class. But then one day, like I said, we just used to sit on the bare floor. There were no desks or books or anything of sort that could reflect a school environment. We're just there, and what we had to do was just repeat whatever the teacher would scribble on the board. And these are scribblings that would be there maybe for weeks on end, because nobody cared whether the kids are learning anything or not, so long they're just being kept preoccupied. So one day I was down there on the floor with my chalk and scribbling whatever was on the board. Then one teacher came up to me and saw what I had written and was quite amazed, because my writing was good compared to what he was expecting for someone with an intellectual disability or whatever the expectation was. Then he immediately went to the headmistress and had a conversation with the headmistress about that. And that's how I was transferred from that school to a regular school. The beauty about the arrangement was that these schools were just right next door to each other. So I was living at one school and learning at another school. So at the new school, again, I found myself in a situation where I could not access most of the classes. And this went on for months because the teachers were just watching me. They didn't care whether I actually went into class or not. I remember the first class that I was taken to, there was a whole fleet of stairs. So if my friends didn't help me to get into class, then it meant I wasn't going to go into class. But after a few months, that's when I was moved to another class that was reasonably accessible. But by then, by the time all these changes were being made and being done, I think I was already demoralized. I didn't feel part of the environment. I didn't feel part of the school. Nobody took any interest in me, whether I went to school or not. And that was for both schools, both where I was staying and where I was learning. My grades went down. At home, of course, people at home realized that my performance had gone down, but everyone just accredited it to different environment, different school. Probably I was just having trouble acclimatizing and everything. But yes, that was part of the experience. Then from that school, that's how I was transferred to Dagama School in on the Copper Belt, which now was a school specifically for kids with physical disabilities, and that was the best time of my life.
And that is where you thrived and you became the best student because of the right environment, because you finally got what you needed. Your full potential academically started to blossom, and you were the best and went on to UNZA to study. Please tell us a bit about that.
So I had another experience at Dagama, like you have rightly put. I found my tribe, as we say. I found my people. I found a very supportive environment. It was accessible. It was just outright. It was bliss. I think for a person with a disability, for a kid with a disability, that was like Disneyland in its own right. And I did really thrive academically. And when I wrote my grade 7, I was the best student. I was the best female student in the district, and I got a scholarship to go to Mpelembo Secondary School, which is one of the best schools on the Copper Belt at the time, because it was a mine school. But again, I faced another challenge. And this time around, the challenge was that the school decided that the school was not accessible for someone with a disability. So that scholarship had to be passed on to somebody that was able-bodied.
But you got a scholarship. You got
right.
a scholarship. They believe that this person intellectually, academically, we want this person. We're proud of this result, the best in the district. But once they saw you as a person with disability, they turned you back. How did that make you feel?
To be honest, it was very hurtful, because I was so excited. It's something that I never imagined in my life. Like I mentioned, I came from a humble background, family-wise, and to even consider being the best student, beating everyone, and our school was not even the best supported school, and so to just be this person that could compete competitively with other kids and turn out to be the best student, I think for me that was just a moment that was so validating of my potential. But at the same time, it was a very insightful experience. It was very painful, because everyone was so excited for me. Everyone was happy that I was going to be their ambassador out there. And then within a week, things changed from I being celebrated to I explaining to everyone why I was still hanging around, why I was still at Dagama and not going to the school that I was supposed to go to. So now I had to explain to everyone why I couldn't go. And it suddenly dawned on me that it's not enough for me to be smart. For a kid, you imagine that if you are smart, you have the world on your feet. But
Yes.
then for me, in that moment, I realized that for a disabled kid, it's not enough to be smart. You are still not enough for this world. No matter how smart you are, no matter how good you are, an able-bodied person is always better than you. So it was very insightful, like I said, but it also gave me a lot of impetus to see change in that narrative, to see change in that thinking. Because when you start convincing kids, or when you're telling kids they have to work hard, and when you work hard you're going to be successful, but then you turn around and you tell them, well, you can work hard and you can be smart, but for as long as you're disabled, it doesn't count. Then the question is, why were we even at school? Why were we even working hard? What was all those long hours that we were pouring into our studies and everything for? Was it just for show? Was it just to keep us distracted? So for me, that was impetus for me to work even harder and to change the narrative. At least I knew I was good enough, but I had to be better than just being good enough. I had to ensure that I also had a seat at the table. And I'm glad that today I have a seat on that table. I'm glad that today we are having these conversations, because that kid that was denied that opportunity is here, is still here. And there are many more opportunities that we can open up with that pain, that was with that wound that was opened years back. We can still look at that and change something. Today we are talking about this because of that. Had I not been denied that opportunity, we would never talk about these things. We would never know the reality of these things. We would never know the reality of exclusion, even in the best schools, even in the worst schools. These things are real. I'm testament to that.
Thank you so much for transmuting the pain to become your fuel for achievement. It was painful. It could have put you down and held you down and made you hate, but you transmuted it to become energy to succeed, and you still are succeeding. When you went to UNZA, what was your experience? Having gone through to grade 12 and again excelling, and you are now going to UNZA, was it convenient? And do you think changes have been made to support people with disabilities? Because while I listened to your talk, you couldn't get to lectures for a lot of times. But again, with your strength, you finished in a record 4 years when nobody thought you would finish and they thought you were going to give up. How was that?
Remember, I said when I went to the Gamma, it was like Disneyland for
Yes.
me. And then I went to UNZA and I was just smacked again in the face. And again, I was reminded, even if you're smart, we don't care. You don't belong here. Because there literally was not anything in that school environment that said we accommodate students with disabilities and we care for students with disabilities. It all began with the room that I was allocated, first of all. The room that I was allocated was on the 4th floor. And like I mentioned, I was on my crutches, and in my entire life, I've never gone up any flight of stairs. And then the dean of students looked me in the eye, yes, and gave me this room. And when I said, but how am I going to be going up there? She just told me, you've got a choice. You see that queue outside there? You can either leave the room and I'll give it to somebody else, or you can get the room and get innovative. But like we are saying, the burden should not always be on persons with disabilities to be innovative about stuff that everyone knows is just impossible to do. I do not have to prove to anyone that I'm resilient, that I cannot be hurt. I am human. We are all human. We can all be hurt. And pain can cause you to stop. Pain can cause you to quit. It's not every day that pain builds character. It's not every day that pain is going to be fuel for you to do better. And especially when pain is consistent. At some point, it feels like the whole universe is conniving just for you to fail. So anyway, like I said, I always fall back on supportive community, because even then I credit my thanks to the YCS community at UNZA that helped for me to mobilize a room on the ground floor. There's a lady that was magnanimous enough to swap. So that's how I ended up on the ground floor, and she went up on the 4th floor where I was allocated that room. But for the next 4 years, it was the hardest 4 years of my life. I do know that everyone, when they talk about their experience at college, at uni, it's a fun time. But for me, it wasn't fun. Not only because of the academics, everyone goes through the hardships of the academics. That comes with the package of uni and everything. But it's just the social aspect of it as well, just moving from my room to the lecture theaters, from my room to the library, and just the general environment. It was actually at UNZA when I stopped using my crutches and adapted to start using a wheelchair, because it just became so impossible for me physically to continue using my crutches and my calipers. So through that process, I have lost something that is so useful to my health, because spending all my time in a wheelchair also is not very healthy. But that is a compromise I had to make. It's either I was going to choose to continue with my crutches or lose out, because I didn't see myself finishing in 4 years. Even with the wheelchair, it was still hard, because I had to depend on my fellow students to help me on so many flights of stairs, which was a risk to myself, and the risk to the students that were helping me. And like I said, we do not have to put this burden on others, because I stopped being a friend and I became a burden to my friends. I am so grateful to my roommate, who was God sent. She was with me for 4 years. So many people didn't even know that we were friends. Many people thought she was my sister that I had moved to uni with to help me, because I needed that kind of help. So this goes back to what the community can do for someone, but the community can only do so much, because as you can imagine, we were not doing the same courses. So there were days that we had conflicting timetables, and she had to attend her own classes and she couldn't help me, meaning I had to miss out on those opportunities. There's so many times I missed out on tutorials because they were in places that I could not access. So like I said, it was really the hardest 4 years of my life. Today, if you ask me, would I want to go to the University of Zambia again? I would want to go to the University of Zambia to study, but I wouldn't put myself through that hardship that I went through. I would not for $1 million, I wouldn't.
I think nobody should be made to go through that, even to get an education. But we do celebrate that you did. And because you did, you can look back and advocate and be part of policy making, which is one of the reasons why women must always be and be led to be in places where policy and decisions are being made. It is the same thing where people that don't know any disability are making decisions for people with disability. You won't even know where to begin and what the reality of such a person is. So we really are grateful that you are in such a position and in such a place, and we're looking forward to you even going to more strategic positions so that more transformation and more inclusiveness will come. I'd like to share with you, if Kasonga will please bring you on, and would like to look at, there is, again, listening to you very avidly, I loved your perspective as to the way society looks at the disabled person and not appreciating, minimizing their potential and expanding on their inabilities. Can you talk to us about that? Because I thought that was a very brilliant perspective.
It's quite funny that so many times, even to date, that half the time when people meet me for the first time, there's so many misconceptions but that people have about me. There are people that sometimes imagine I'm a secretary, even at the workplace. There are people that I would have worked with for so many years and would assume I'm just a secretary. Or my point is, people would always imagine you at the lowest end of the chain. Not once would people walk up to me and imagine that I am the person that they get to know when I talk to them after I open up and everything. And what that tells me is that people first see my wheelchair and they minimize my entirety into what that wheelchair represents. They don't give me opportunity to know who I am, know the person behind the wheelchair. How did I end up in that wheelchair? They just see a wheelchair and assume the worst, that they can imagine whatever their experience is of someone in a wheelchair, that's what they will project on me. You'd always have to explain yourself to people to say you are ABCD, as you rightly put it. When I was at the University of Zambia, a lady rightly told me, so you're going to be here for 8 years. And in my naivety, I wondered to say, is it because of the course that I had chosen that it took that long, or what? Yeah. When I asked her why, she said, well, I just thought in your condition it's going to be very hard. And then I thought to myself, no, I plan on finishing in 4 years. Like, again, like I said, that always tells me what people think of persons with disabilities. They always see inability. Yes, I do have inabilities, but the inabilities that people exaggerate are not my real inabilities.
Mm.
It is my potential that they focus on. Nobody sees, as if you saw me in a wheelchair today, you can easily tell that my upper body is just fine. It's just my lower part of my body that is disabled. But regardless, people will just straight away minimize whatever it is that I could be and just think she's in a wheelchair. What can she be? And that is where the problem stems from. This is why even today, when people have a disabled child, the first thing they think about is, what can this one be? What can she do? Earlier on, you touched on the relationship between being disabled and being a woman, because in my experience, I've noticed that many of the celebrated persons with disabilities are men. Because if you are disabled and you are a boy, there is still opportunity for you to thrive, and the family imagines that you're going to find a wife and you can still lead a normal life. But for a woman, because the worth of a woman, especially here in Africa, the worth of a woman is to be married. But then again, when you talk about uh, marriage material, a woman who is marriage material, there's a lot of ableism. She has to be able to do so many things. But for me as a disabled woman, clearly I cannot do many of the things that an able-bodied woman does. And this is why even amongst us as women, we complain about, especially women with disabilities, we complain how the whole feminism has left us behind, because even our fellow women, they don't see us as women. We are at the bottom of the food chain of humanity. Even there, even our own mothers, our own sisters, our own cousins, they look down on us. So for me, this is why I'm saying that as a disabled person, people tend to exaggerate your inabilities without giving you an opportunity to see what is still there. What is it that what can you work with to still have a normal life, as normal as it can be in a world, in a disabled world? But we rush to exaggerate the disabilities, and we exclude persons with disabilities based on those assumptions that we have, simply because you saw someone that looked like Georgina Mumba on Cairo Road, therefore Georgina Mumba cannot do anything. But why is it that we see able-bodied people begging on the streets, but we still give chance to people out there? We still see street kids begging on the streets, but we still give chance to kids. But when it comes to disabled kids, disabled adults, the ones that we see on the streets is how we imagine everyone can be. But we never take responsibility of how we have contributed to those people being on the street. Because like I said, if I had given up because of all the challenges that I've been through in my life, and believe you me, there are many opportunities, that reasonable opportunities, why I could have given up, but I didn't. And I do not imagine that those that I see on the streets, those that are still hidden in homes, they're any different than I am. I'm just lucky. I'm very, very grateful that God has been gracious to me, for giving me the family that I have, for allowing the people that have come in my life at the right time, at every stage of my life, despite the challenges, but there's always been that helping hand. I just hope that so many people could replicate the things that those that have been helpful to me could also do, because we can all learn from all these people. They're just ordinary people. They're not extraordinary people, just ordinary people that you meet along the way. Yes.
This is really amazing. And again, we give thanks to God and to the people He has placed around you, because He probably has raised you to be a voice for those people. He's raised you to be a voice for the helpless. And He has allowed you to go through what every disabled person is going through, different disabilities, just for your voice to be heard and to be louder. So we celebrate that and we thank you for it. Again, I would like to add here from listening to you, a physical disability is not a mental disability, it's not a spiritual disability. Therefore, people should stop looking at disabled people, physically disabled, and stop feeling ashamed and stop thinking what they need is sympathy, but what they need is respect and inclusion and appreciation of their potential and helping them develop this potential. I believe that is what you're saying to us tonight. What would you say to that?
Like you have rightly put it, life in and of itself is sacred. Whether I am physically disabled, I'm mentally disabled, or have intellectual disabilities, however we label these disabilities, life in and of itself is sacred, and everyone is entitled to respect and to opportunity to be the best that they can be. My only message is, please, when we meet, when we see a child, when we see an adult with a disability, regardless of their disability, allow them opportunity to know not only what they can do, because life is not just about what we can do. All of us have limitations. We are all not all encompassing people with abnormal abilities. We all have only so much that we can do. But irrespective of our limitations, we're still provided an opportunity to be the best that we can be. And that is all that persons with disabilities are also asking for. Because even I'm only learning, how does this work? Because the norm is being able-bodied. Being disabled is the abnormal, if I may use that term loosely. So as I'm also just navigating this, as time as I don't know how to do this best. I'm just doing my best. So you cannot deny me an opportunity to learn how does this work, but you cannot also deny yourselves an opportunity to learn how this works. I'll give you an example of what is happening in the world today. We are all grappling with the issue of COVID-19. Nobody knows the full extent of COVID-19. But with each passing day, we are telling ourselves we are learning how the full extent of this pandemic. We are also learning how to adapt to the new normal. That's why today we are having this conversation online instead of physically. It is because we have allowed ourselves the opportunity to be open-minded and say we do not know, but we're willing to learn and to know how this works out. The same can be extended to persons with disabilities. The same can be extended to the reality of disability, because any one of us can be disabled. But I always avoid using that because it's not supposed to be about threatening people to say, tomorrow you might be disabled. It's not about that, because there are already people that are living with disabilities today, and we are making their life harder than it already is for no reason other than just our own unfounded fears. Can we just all allow each other to live as God created us? Because I didn't create myself the way I am. You didn't create yourself the way you are. But you're just allowing yourself to see how this can pan out. And that is just, yes, please.
And we need to support ourselves. I really enjoy listening to you. We need to understand, for example, you were okay till you were 2 years old. It was to no fault of yours. You did not come here to say, make me like this. Therefore, we shouldn't make life harder for that person already going through a lot of hardship. And I think we as society, every one of us, need a lot of education and illumination as to the realities of people living with disabilities. And we thank God they are championing that cause. You have gone on to win the several awards. You won the Mandela Washington Award. You won the Push 2020 Award, the Brenda Muntemba Award. And you won these. You have been, apart from your work in policy, working with the Zambian Public Service, you have been very active in the public speaking space. You have built your potential. and you have built your confidence that you advocate in different ways to the point of international and national recognition. Tell us about that. What kind of work have you done, and what inspired you to get into all that work that you are awarded and recognized with fellowships, with national awards from your fellow women who recognize you as an achiever and as a leader in your right? Please tell us about that.
As I said earlier on, for me, advocacy work is hardly about work, but a lifestyle. So most of these awards that I've gone to win, like the Brenda Muntemba Award, for me, that is a very humbling recognition from the Push Women Network. The Mandela Washington Fellowship is a platform for young leaders who get to have to have an opportunity to go to America for 6 weeks and get training in leadership. And as you have mentioned, I've spoken at the LusakaTedEx. All of these, believe it or not, have been through recommendations from people that I hardly even know they are watching what I'm doing. For me, I take every single day of my existence as an opportunity, as I mentioned before, to make this world a little bit better than I found it. All these things that I've gone through, all these challenges that I've gone through were there, all these barriers were there because nobody spoke about them, because they were not a priority to someone, because they did not hinder someone out there. I've spoken about the University of Zambia. The University of Zambia has graduated so many people in this country. We have so many alumni from the University of Zambia, including all our presidents, various ministers and various influential people in society today. They've all been through the University of Zambia. And the fact that these challenges are still there, it tells me that these are not challenges that these people went through. Because if these are challenges that were intimate to these people, they could have done something about it. But the few of us with disabilities, the few of us whose education experience was impacted, negatively impacted by those experiences, we have an obligation, we have a duty to speak on these things and ensure that somebody that is going to come behind me could have a little bit better experience than I did. So for me, that is where the inspiration comes from to speak on these things. Most of the times, I just use my public speaking opportunities to raise these issues. I'm very active on my Facebook page. I speak a lot on these issues because, believe you me or not, every single day, there's always an opportunity for you to encounter discrimination, exclusion, and all the other things that we've already discussed that comes with a lifestyle such as mine. But also, like I said, pain has a way of changing people. Sometimes it changes people for the better, and sometimes it changes them for the worse. And there are many, many disabled people out there who have coiled into a shell because of how society has been very, very harsh on them because of that pain. Because every day that I step out of my home is an opportunity for me to be confronted with that kind of pain, but I still choose to go out. But there's somebody out there who chooses not to go out because they cannot stand that pain anymore. And guess who causes that pain? We do, as human beings. We do, because it's beyond the impairment that I have. Just me sitting in my wheelchair is not the hardest part of this lifestyle, but it is what society does to me as a consequence of me sitting in this wheelchair. That is the hardest part. So for me, that is where my work comes from, and that is the bedrock of what I do. And I hope through these conversations, we can help change the narrative. I pray that maybe 10 years down the line, we could have different conversations. One day, I look to when I go to the University of Zambia, I can find it a little bit more accessible When I go to a regular school, I can find it more accessible for any kid to go there. They don't have to have headaches when they think of going to a school and imagine to say, is it going to be accessible? Is the environment going to be inclusive? Are my teachers going to be understanding? I wish that conversation, I wish disability could no longer be a taboo in our society. It shouldn't just be a taboo. I shouldn't be a taboo.
I think it is a discussion that you should continue as you have done, and many of you with disability are doing, obviously from what you've said to us. When you haven't gone through a thing, and all of us have gone through the same system, our leaders have gone through, but because they do not suffer or have not experienced it, therefore the system remains the same. It means that we need to be inclusive in having people with disabilities in decision-making positions. We need to aspire to enter those positions to create space for more people to come. It's the same thing that happens to women. We're excluded, women are excluded from decision-making places, and oftentimes stigmatized. Some families are even looked down on because they had women for children, to no fault of theirs. And by the way, for a woman to be born, it is not the fault of the mother, it's the fault, and it's not a fault. It's just nature. It is the father that determines the sex of a child, not the mother. So if you want to blame anybody for having women, go to the fathers, because that's just biology, isn't it? It's the same way. No child came and said, make me a disabled, give me a deformity or a disability. It is the parents. So why does society therefore make it harder? That is something I have taken away, that we already are going through enough. Then you are making life harder for us by the way you live with us, by the stereotypes, by looking at me in a wheelchair and minimizing me to thinking I'm nothing but a wheelchair, rather than seeing I'm able to change policy for a nation and to redesign and re-engineer our thinking. Nobody sees that unless you show yourself. So it is really amazing. I want to take you to ask you as we close, what do we need to do in your experience and from your exposure, being an advocate for this? What do we need to do? You're a woman leader, you're a leader recognized by your peers, not as a deformed person, but as a leader. What do we need to do to make our society, our policies, our nation, and individuals more inclusive? What do you think?
What do we need to do for us to be more inclusive? I think one of the principal things that we can do is what you're doing here, Pastor. I'm very, very grateful, and I'm very honored for this opportunity for us to have this engagement. As I mentioned earlier, that disability remains a taboo in our society, and it remains a taboo because we do not allow ourselves to talk about these things. Many people assume that a disability is a consequence of a demon, or it's a spiritual thing. I do not want to delve into that because I'm not an authority to speak on that. All I know is I am disabled, I am here, and let's do this. So what I believe we can do is begin with acknowledging that disability is a reality. How it comes about is really not going to help matters. Whether we know the source or not, the reality is that we cannot change it. And if we cannot change it, then how best can we help each other so that we can all live side by side and we can all give each other an opportunity to thrive? So how do we do that? Is by being open-minded enough, is by being supportive enough. It is by recognizing that creating opportunities for persons with disabilities is not charity, because we are all citizens of this motherland. So if you put up a ramp, if you make doors accessible, if you make schools accessible, that's not charity. That is just a service that should be extended to every citizen, and disabled people are citizens as well. When you allow
this should be a point where we give you a standing ovation, honestly. I think that is absolutely, I wish you could replay that and for us to keep hearing it. Now, please go on.
Yes, as I was saying, because half the time we imagine that by being inclusive, then because we've delved into this tokenistic culture where if we have a disabled someone in our organizations or if we invite a disabled person, then we want to be lauded for having done something that is out of the natural. But that is not supposed to be the case. The norm should be that everyone should just be included. That is why there's talk about leaving no one behind. But we shouldn't just think of leaving no one behind by thinking last of the person with the disability. We should begin first with those in our community that are most marginalized, those whose needs we cannot immediately think about, because if you build a home, for example, or an office, you would know that the entrance is going to have stairs because everyone can use stairs or a lift. But you have to think to say, but how is Georgina going to get into there? Because first of all, you do not understand how Georgina interacts with things like stairs or a lift or whatever. The people whose needs you cannot immediately understand are the people whose needs you should put first. So we should have that mentality with whatever it is that we're doing.
Sorry, Georgina, it means that in our design stages, we must call Georgina to the table and say, Georgina, how does this work? Is this good?
Indeed. Right.
But we are not doing that.
No, we're not. We want to think on behalf of persons with disabilities. We have an attitude of infantilizing persons with disabilities.
I like that. Infantilizing and tokenism.
Yes,
and
because we always
please go on.
We always imagine we know better and they don't know enough about themselves. We should know better. Because my mother carried me on her back up to age 10, that she would imagine that she knows me better. The disabled girl that she knew is not the disabled person that I am today. My needs, I may not still be able to walk, but she really doesn't understand my world. She has to allow me to have my own agency. And this is what we're saying. We need to allow persons with disabilities to have their own agency, because we've always infantilized them, because we've excluded them, we've marginalized them, and we use them as tokenistic tokens that we have to parade to people to show that we are doing good. And that is how we end up doing the wrong thing every single time. But if we allow ourselves opportunity, if we allow ourselves to have conversations, honest conversations like we are having tonight, then we can start having progress. Thank you.
You have totally, I feel so challenged and just listening to you. And every time I just want to give you a standing ovation, because I think that you have such a beautiful mind. And I think this mind should not be excluded from anything development in Zambia. And to think that we have thousands and thousands of beautiful minds like yours that we have minimized and sometimes totally excluded to the point of stigmatization and rejection. We have used religious ideas, cultural ideas that are baseless to justify what we have done. It is so refreshing to hear this. And I pray that I will challenge you that do more than this. Can we do this more often? Because we need to hear your voice more often and go beyond. Please go beyond just this Zambian space and get into parliament. I think we need you in parliament. I think you need to speak on behalf of everyone and get more of us that have disabilities to speak, because until we know what you're going through, we cannot plan for you. And you cannot be off that table if you want us to plan for you. So I pray you keep asserting yourself. Unfortunately, time has come for us to go, but you definitely know this is not the last. We will talk. We thank God for you, your life. We thank God for your family that have supported and have shown society what it is, and your friends in particular. Your roommate in UNZA, she ought to win an award, a Nobel Prize by the grace of God. I hope you will say, please share with us your Facebook page. I would like everybody to know. So can you just say it out there and let us get it? And we need to go follow you on social media. Please just say it to us so we can all hear.
Right. So I'm just Georgina. You can just type in Georgina Mumba on Facebook, and
Okay.
I'm sure you get me. I'm not sure that too many Georgina Mumbas on wheelchairs. Right. Yes.
And how about, are you on YouTube? Are you on Instagram? Are you on LinkedIn? Where else? Are you on
Um,
Twitter?
mo Mostly I'm on Facebook. That's where my advocacy work mostly is. On YouTube, it's just that my TED talk, that the one that you shared earlier, and the other talk that I did when I was in the US, speaking
Yeah.
on the same. Yes.
Which is the talk on the US. Would you please share the link after the
It's it's similar. You can also just check Georgina Mumba disability policy on YouTube, and you'll find my talk there. It's quite similar to the TED talk that I did. Right.
Brilliant. I think we should show it so that more people can watch it, and I'm
Right.
sure that will be convenient. Georgina, I want to thank you for the courageous life you are living. I want to thank you for the victorious life you are living, because you wouldn't be who you are if you hadn't first defeated the disability in your mind. It is because you are not disabled here that you're a champion out there, and we celebrate you. It is such a joy to have been sent to talk to you, because the women from Push who celebrate your achievement recommended that we talk to you. So to Cornell and to all the women from Push, we celebrate you, and we hope that you will take the challenge, that you will come and talk to us some more, even on the CBC platform, so that more people are aware. I think society needs a lot of education and information from you and from all of us with disability coming to say, look, understand me. I'm no less, but I have much more if you will believe in me. I think that discussion has to come. We thank God for all that have contributed to who you are today, and for all the achievements. We congratulate you. We hope to see you soon again on this platform, passing the baton to the younger generation, and hoping that we will have better leaders to be more inclusive and to be more supportive of everyone that is living with a disability. Thank you so much, Georgina Mumba. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pastor. Thank you to Push Women Network for the recognition and the support. And thank you to you, Pastor, and CBC for giving me this opportunity. I look forward to us doing more work and more advocacy, and hoping together we can change the narrative of African disability and how we look at disability in general. Thank you so much. And thank you to the listeners. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to share with you one woman that I celebrate as a Zambian heroine. She has been in the forefront of women's rights. She just sent a text here, Mrs. Gladys Mutukwa. She is just saying Georgina is so awesome. That is a message direct from Mrs. Georgina Mutukwa. She is our champion. She is a champion of women. Mom, we know you are watching. That is one of you, those are one of your daughters, and your work for the women in the women's space. We celebrate you, even as you celebrate. Mrs. Mutukwa says she's giving you a standing ovation, Georgina, and she thinks you're amazing.
Thank you so much.
Keep it to me. Let me share it with you. And she's watching you right now. So, Mom, thank you for the fight and the standing you stood for women. And Georgina, thank you that you are going into those spaces and making more room for women. Viewers, we have been talking with Georgina Mumba. She is an advocate for women and for people living with disabilities. She has won several awards. She has represented Zambia internationally, talking about disabilities. She works with the Zambia authorities to create and design policies and a society that will accommodate for better life and better living for every disabled Zambian, because that Zambian is no less a Zambian because they are disabled. They are even more because they are fighting battles none of us know about. So till we come your way again, I want to say thank you, everybody. We come tomorrow with another defining story of another woman that has gone through scars and is flying the flag of that constituency called women. Till we join you again tomorrow evening on Scars the Stars, I say, me and my team, Kasongo, Andrew Musonda, and all the beautiful women, Petronella and Priscilla from God Ministries and Lead Africa Women's Institute, we say thank you for joining us. We will see you tomorrow on Scars the Stars on CBC Television. Good night.